Plus, your team will get a real boost to their motivation if they hear you praising them. Will, as promised, sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, mate, not a problem at all, not a problem.
You gotta love that smell of petrol in the morning. Yes, F1 is back, this time with another yearly increment. As always since 2009, we're back with F1 2020. Very similar, no surprise to anyone, from 2019, the version I covered last year on all formats. Fundamentally, the game has not changed drastically, as you can imagine. You still drive around really quick in circles across tracks, competing with other people trying to do the same thing. If you're faster, you win. There's no prizes for being second place here. But there is the additional now of the DLC in Michael Schumacher. The Red Baron returns with 4 of his most famous cars from the 1990s. The legend that is Michael Schumacher is a really good addition to the title, and you can play as him throughout a full F1 or F2 season as you see fit. So that's a real benefit to the title overall. There's also the addition of new tracks. The Netherlands circuit is now in there, the Zandvoort circuit, and obviously a new Vietnam circuit has been added as well. And there's an additional bonus there for the control mechanism to now handle more casual gamers, which you can turn all those functions off. Anyone who's played the F1 titles and turned it on to full pro mode knows how difficult and accurate it is in terms of the power spinning out and control. It's very, very hard. So that casual mode should make the game more appealing to more players. One welcome return is Co-op Couch Split Screen. Yes, it finally returns. Taking me back to my old N64 and PS1 days where co-op split screen was a normality, not an exception. Here you can play a whole weekend from qualifying to race, which is a welcome addition to humiliate anyone else around you, even if it is your son desperately trying to keep up. There's no mercy in racing. Across all formats, the sacrifices here are small. It does cut back from 60 FPS to 30 FPS, but it's still the same resolution, and because it's horizontal split, therefore your field of view is still pretty good, although in cockpit view is a little too difficult in my opinion. But gameplay wise, it still controls and plays as excellent as before, but it's not a grand update, an increment that you've come to expect, and not the same kind of leap that last year's visually was. You obviously get the 2020 seasons, the 2020 drivers, and you have to download a lot of that, and you do get the option now to start in F2, and obviously take just a cut down version, a reduced half season or a full season, so that makes the whole thing more accessible, or you can go full in and start from scratch. Now, one of the biggest benefits to the game overall though is the new team mode. You can now create your own driver, choose your sponsor, your engine supplier, get your teammate into the team and be an 11th team on the grid and start from the ground up. And that includes all the fundamentals in terms of managing the team, the engine development, the chassis development, and using those resources to maximise the potential and improve the vehicle and team across the seasons. And this includes those interviews and actually talking to the press at certain points to try and boost morale and boost obviously your image and your brand as you work through the career mode, which is actually a 10-year career mode. And overall, these sections are actually very well presented, both graphical models, fidelity and animation, obviously motion captured, and they work supremely well. They're up there with FIFA style and actually better in many ways because they actually use dialogue when you get interviewed. The pit sections are not quite as impressive and they don't look quite as good. Certainly the character models are not as good, but you will skip these more often than not, so really it would be a waste to spend more time on those. But they certainly embellish and round off a well presented game, even if they've got a very polite Englishman interviewing you at the start of each race.
So tell us a little about yourself. What's the thing you're... Really appreciate your time, but I know you're very keen to get on. Best of luck out there.
One very important part of racing games and games as a whole is the sound. Those engine sounds are important, and the mixture here between older and newer classes does give you that mixture of sound quality, and unfortunately, like motorcycles, the sound of bikes and cars has gone downhill in the real life. But you can only work with what you've got, and they use it well. Reverb, acoustics, bad condition, good condition, it all sounds good and it adds additional atmosphere. But the engine has a lot of heritage. The Ego engine began life back in 2007 from Codemasters in Colin McRae Dirt. This engine and title went on to much bigger and grander things, and it also spawned the F1 series that Codemasters have made ever since. And their heritage really goes back to the old Commodore 64 days when they pretty much invented simulation, whilst equally creating and dominating the budget market on the C64 BMX simulator, a classic from my youth. But the Ego engine has a lot of legacy itself. A offshoot or a spur from the Neon engine that powered Dirt and then moved into the Ego engine we know now. It actually all started from the Sony proprietary Fire engine that was made to push multi-platform titles and has been used on a great multitude of titles, such as a few years ago here in Unravel, and even a recent RPG due for Western release, Trails of Cold Steel 4, which is due for release later this year. So the engine has heritage. But the offshoot from that, the Ego engine, is Codemasters' own and has been customised to deliver what they want, which is high action, higher octane, fast frame rates and obviously high simulation with multiple cars and decent polygon throughput to generate the titles we've seen over the years. And they made a substantial leap last year by bringing in much better volumetric lighting, PBR based materials and shading work across the cars and livery, which adds a great deal to the visual quality. Even if there's certain areas that still need improvement, it is a very impressive looking game, and it's certainly one that delivers the goods through and through. So moving into the base consoles to kick off with, we can see just like last year they use a reconstruction or checkerboard method, certainly signs there on the Xbox One, that it's using a 960 by 1080 resolution to get there. And that's what it ran at last year, and the PS4 runs the same 1920 by 1080 with no reconstruction, no checkerboard signs at all. Now what is different is the Xbox One this year now has a dynamic resolution scaling within that, which means it scales from 1600 by 900 at its lowest point up to a full 1920 by 1080. This does soften the image and some of those artifacts can be seen, but generally there's not a huge difference between them. But that scaling does help another aspect of the title I'll touch on in a moment. But that also means that there's some reductions in visual quality between the two consoles as well. As you can see here in the rain, the droplets and water distortion and refraction on the screen is missing on the Xbox One. The screen space reflections are slightly lower quality and LOD is also reduced. This means that it runs the higher quality settings on the PS4, which it runs exactly the same quality visual settings on the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One here. Both these versions again run very similar checkerboard solutions just like last year to get to their final rendering output, of which the PS4 Pro is the same 3200 by 1800 and the Xbox One is a full 3840 by 2160, but it also has that dynamic element from the Xbox One included within that. So I have seen it go down to 3200 by 1800. This is not as often as you would expect, but it certainly scales between the two measures. I didn't catch any points on the PS4 Pro or the PS4 where any scaling is in place, but I'm not saying it's not there, I just didn't spot any. But again, that reduction in those slight areas does mean that you get better performance. The other change between the two versions is the Xbox One has the lowest quality LOD. You can see here as I'm comparing the two, the LOD is cut back on the Xbox One. It's much better and more fuller on the PS4, but those areas I'm just touching, you can see the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X push the LOD up even further. And again, screen space reflections are more refined, there's more of them, and they push further off into the distance, as does LOD overall in the races. But the one sacrifice on the PS4 Pro to the Xbox One, just like last year, and I'm definitely sure this time, is the shadow quality is lower. There's no filtering at all on the PS4 Pro, and they're much lower resolution. You can see in the replay section here, whereas on the Xbox One, they're higher quality shadows, high resolution, and they're filtering with those soft penumbra edges on them. They're just better shadows overall, and you really notice them in the replays, but in the races it's harder to spot, but it is still there. Now aside this, everything else across all formats is identical, and that includes that performance metric. It still comes out with a very fast responsive 63-66 milliseconds in terms of input latency time, so it's still responsive as ever, but performance has been improved. Those sacrifices and amendments to the resolution scaling, the checkerboard solution and everything else that's gone on with both versions now means that we see an almost fully locked 60 FPS across all platforms. Unlike last year and maybe a later patch on 2019, it no longer has a big disparity between the base consoles and the premium consoles, with 60 FPS being consistently held. In fact, there's hardly any tearing now at all. It still runs an adaptive VSync, but it rarely tears on any version. I caught one or two spots on the Xbox One S, a couple of spots on the PS4, only in heavy rain. We're talking single digits here, and even in terms of frame drops, there's one or two. The PS4 and the Xbox One S are almost identical in the day, and they're pretty much identical in the rain. The only stressful sections you can see on screen. And this is where the game really excels. The performance, the action, the interaction, the simulation, and everything else wrapped up, but feeling like you're racing out on the track in an F1 car. It's an exceptional game to play, and it feels superb both from a control input time and now a full refresh rate time on all consoles. There's no difference. And that is a job well done, because it means consistency across the board. You're not missing out by not having a premium version of the consoles, and that really is a great piece of work from the team. And that really leaves me at the end of the game and the review. You can see some more frame rate across the premium consoles, again in both the dry and the wet, but there's a couple of torn frames, no drop frames. We're talking nothing in between them. The only problem I did find, and I must mention this specifically, is now the game uses an online sync and communication with servers at all times. The remote servers from Codemasters can be a bit iffy. I had a few problems occasionally getting disconnect errors, and it certainly makes the loading into levels as it's syncing data, validating your save points, validating your online profile. All of that slows down the connection rate and the loading rate quite significantly, and it impacts your enjoyment. Even when you're loading back to restart a track, if you have to, it affects that as well. I've had upwards of a minute at certain points, and it affects the PS4 and the PS4 Pro worse than it affects the Xbox One and the Xbox One S. So Xbox platforms tend to run this slightly better. They still suffer from it, but not as bad as the PS4 platform and the PS4 Pro platform. But the game does have some day one patches coming. I didn't have a chance to test them all. I waited a day just to make sure I got it, but it hasn't come out for the Xbox One. I'm on version 1.02 on the PS4, and it is slightly better but not fully fixed. But the team will be releasing patches like every team does nowadays, so I'm sure these issues will be remedied quite quickly. And the server issue itself could be fixed just by sorting out the remote servers and not needing a patch. And that pretty much ends my video on another cracking F1 title. It's again an increment from last year's version, not a bigger leap as 2018 to 2019, but still substantially improved in enough areas that if you're a keen hardcore F1 fan, then this really delivers the good. But the biggest improvement is that teams element, the additional tracks, the split screen, and that huge leap in performance that all versions now deliver, or at least the base versions, which have gone from an average of 45 at certain points on the old version to a locked 60 here, even in heavy rain conditions. And that is really what racing games are all about. Anyway, that's me. Another video's done. If you like this or anything else that I've put together, please like, subscribe and share where appropriate. As you always know, I'm self-funded and completely independent, so ring that bell if you want to be notified of new videos as I put them up. But for now, I'm out, so put the pedal to the metal and don't stop until you see the checkered flag. I'll catch you on the next one.